Would you like to vibe code a user interface such as the one you're seeing now, where we've got access to light and dark mode, where we can switch between different applications and have menus that make sense for each of the applications? We've got the concept of settings at the app level and at the global level, and all of this was done using two simple prompts. And in this video, what we'll do is I'll show you the two prompts and how they can be adapted to any sort of user interface that you'd like to create. I'm Happy Dave, let's get into it. Yesterday I was putting together a video using Claude Code, and the idea was to go through a fairly long product requirements document and build out the application one epic at a time. And so as I was working through it, I'd built out all the technical foundations. I'd started getting into a little bit of the application scaffolding, the concepts of like a wizard that I could go through each of the items. But one of the challenges I had was that it looked pretty average. Now this morning, having a simple conversation with ChatGPT for requirements and Claude for generating the application, I was able to come up with this simple application harness for the visual user interface. And the idea of it was, from the get-go, I could have extensions in the form of micro apps. So here we've got Visual Studio, Slack, Figma. A lot of these names came from the example applications that I used in part of the conversation around what other applications are out there that do what I want to do. And it came up with this provider model, so I should be able to build AI agents that can build new applications quite simply, but they don't have to build the rest of the user interface, such as the menus that you're seeing here, which are application specific, but they're already being designed into the application frame we have right now. The idea that an application should have settings is being encapsulated here, but the idea that the whole application and the multiple applications going on can have their own settings are here. At the moment, if I click on that, this now remains fixed. So as I move off, that's not collapsing, but later on it can become collapsible. So let's have a look at the conversation that I used to build firstly the requirements, and then we'll look at how I made it all come together. So the conversation started off fairly simply just speaking into the microphone in advanced mode, where I said, keep every answer short in the conversation. It started that way. I didn't want long diatribes from it. All I wanted to do was say, I want examples of host applications that have a multi-app sort of feeling. So the first one it came up with was Salesforce and Microsoft 360. I gave it additional information. It was telling me about the plugins that go on in WordPress. We talked a little bit about the extensions that go in Visual Studio. And part of the conversation was also talking about the stuff I liked and I didn't like in different applications. At one stage, it came up with WeChat as a perfect example of the sort of application framework I wanted. But then I realized that that was a mobile first approach and I really needed a desktop first approach. But I was starting to get a feel that the WeChat approach would be perfect. If I understood it more, I haven't used the application myself, but I mentioned that it's now starting to sound a lot like an operating system, like an Android phone, where you've got all these multiple applications. You can click on them, they all open, but there's often a lot of similarity in the user interface. As I was doing my conversation, I was ending up with extra GitHub repos like this one here, and noticed it was 5 years old, so that was no good for me. So I started to ask it the simple question, where are we at? All I wanted to do was consolidate what we've been talking about. And I followed up with just the assumption that WeChat is limited to the mobile phone. I need something that's on the desktop. Now, after a couple of other questions backwards and forwards, we started coming up with various applications that I knew, like Slack and VS Code, and talking about how they worked. Concepts like Control K to go into search, the idea of contextual surfacing, where applications don't appear on the left-hand side until you needed them. So I was thinking maybe I need some pinned applications that I use all the time, others that just show up recently. Now you might be wondering, from the prompt engineering point of view, how do you do this yourself? What is the system? Well, the system is simply a simple conversation of what I like and what I don't like through example. I'm just asking, what are the applications in this category that do this, such as Microsoft Teams? I had little statements like, hang on, Microsoft Teams only has a few applications. Would this be the right system for me? And I started to learn what are the functionality that I want. This is building up the requirements document through trial and error. Now, one of the things that the conversation naturally went into, but that I didn't want it to go into, was the idea of, do any of the apps need multi-step workflows? Now, if you go to what's been built, this is going to be hosting multi-stage wizards where the steps will show up down the left and there'll be a wizard in the middle. But none of that has anything to do with the application harness. That's the specific application that I want to build in another step. Now, the idea it was coming up with both visually but also in the data shaping was that it needed to explore areas like the user roles and permissions, how should the data move, what sort of database. And I told it to exclude these areas because this is not what I wanted to build from just a user interface point of view. It did ask me if I wanted light and dark mode. So I said, yes, I did. I wanted settings. I did tell it that I needed both global settings and application specific setting. And sometimes I would ask it, what do you think we should explore? And it would just come up with different areas from the framework, the application discovery, the user interface, the data consistency. And this is where I would answer some of them and say some of them aren't relevant. By this time, it had come up with 7 areas that were pretty relevant for me. We've got the application panel, which would have the pinned, the recent, it should be collapsible. It had the actual menu item, which is the menu of individual applications. Then how do they show as a main display? It then started talking about a conversational chat panel, which I decided to let go of, mainly because that's really going to sit within the application and it's optional, not part of something I need in the application shell. I did need the Command K interface to do searches. I did need a top bar and I did need a footer status. And so it was getting really good at writing a brief for me, and I just gave it a little bit of extra instruction and said, can you now turn it into a full document? And there we had the full document. Once this was in place and I knew that all the information was specifically what I wanted, excluding the stuff that I didn't want, I was just able to press the copy button. So with our design brief in our clipboard, it's a case of how do we run it within this case Anthropic. So what I did was I headed over to Claude, and you can see I've said, here is the brief, and I've just pasted everything in verbatim. But there is a little bit going on just before this conversation, and that's the idea of what sort of role do we want. Now, the reason I don't drop this really detailed requirements document directly into the conversation is just understanding the nature of how large language models work. So if you were doing a search for promoting a website and you did it on Google, you might say, how do I promote a website? And might come up with ideas around search engine optimization and backlinks. It might come up with content creation, or it might come up with search engine marketing, so Facebook ads or Google AdWords. Now, you shouldn't generally use your large language models the way you work with Google. Instead, what you want to do is get it to become a certain type of person in the real world, because the way large language models generate the next token is usually based on what come before. So what I like to do is train it and say, you are a specific sort of person. But again, I don't come up with that idea. I let that build it for myself. So let's have a look at that. And what we'll do is we'll jump over to the original conversation and we'll take it to the top. Now, a lot of this was done just talking into the microphone. So there's all sorts of typos going on in here, but it was still quite accurate. So I said, you're going to design a user interface. I'm going to give you the details. That's the requirements document that you just looked at. And it said, if I wanted to develop a role under which you operate, so basically what sort of human are you, and your experiences and your strengths is building multi-app user experiences, give it examples like Teams and Slack, stuff like that. I mentioned concepts like multiple plugins or multiple sub apps. I give it examples and it doesn't even get the text right, but it doesn't matter. We've got Visual Studio going in there. And with all this information just said directly into the microphone, it ends up coming up with what is considered a pretty good role for a multi-platform UX systems architect. I don't think I used the term systems architect anywhere, but it knew how to design this. So this then becomes the full context, and you just paste the prompt that you want directly after you've built the role that you want. So about a minute after actually pasting this in, we got this little button here that we can click to pull up the application. We also got a summary, which I never bothered to read until now, and then realized it had implemented the Command and Control K. Let's go and check whether that worked, because I haven't tested that yet. So we come over to the application. We've got our light and our dark mode. We've got our expanding menu, which has the individual apps that we want. We have the ability to lock the menu in place by clicking the settings here. In the real world, other sorts of menus might pop up there. Then we've got the menus related to the individual app. Now let's see what happens if we press Command K. It looks like it's doing something. We can not do anything right now, but all of this functionality all worked in one hit by getting the role right and just having a conversation about what you do and what you don't want. I think one final useful test while we have this is if we look at the underlying HTML, we've got a bunch of CSS going on here. If we go to the very bottom, we've got a little bit of JavaScript going on, and above that, raw HTML. So this is not the sort of format I want to use in the application I'm building here. So this application is using React. It's got ShadCN and Tailwind CSS. So what I've done is I've just started a remix on the application that we've put together, and we'll just test a little prompt. What would it take to turn the entire application structure into a React component using ShadCN and Tailwind CS? And let's just see what it comes up with. So we got a bunch of code being written at the moment. This is the React desktop shell with ShadCN / starting to write the app panel component right there. We've got application items. We've got a little bit of HTML being embedded in here. Here's our light dark mode component being written. We've got something pretty ugly coming together at the moment. Now, the reason this is showing up like this is if we look at the underlying code, all we have is the code for the individual components. And this is probably perfect if we wanted to take it over as components into the existing application. But I think we should do a little more. So when you look on the left here, it talks about the architecture changes that it's made. It's told us about the ShadCN UI components it's used, and it's got other information. But I just asked it a simple question. Would you be able to recreate a HTML page that is using React and actually works? What would be your strategy? Is it as simple as a HTML page, or do we need to do more? And it starts working through it. It's using a CDN when we look at the code in a moment. So let's just go and click on this and see what we get. And we've got the HTML, we're using CDNs to go and get Tailwind, to go and get React. Everything else is just being written. And so when we run it, it looks like we've got a real application. Now I might just hit the publish button and see what happens from here. So we click on our published link and it takes us over here. We've got some errors, but let's just see what it does. Now it doesn't quite look as good as the HTML version, so there'll be a few changes that we need to do. We do have the dropout menu. It doesn't look like it locks down, so that's not working the same. If we press Command K, let's see what we get there. We've got the ability to search, so if I type in Slack, it finds it. So it's now actually working, which is good. And light and dark mode, there's a little bit of issues with this, but otherwise we've been able to create all our components and we've been able to see what they could look like in a hosted application. So to recap, what we've done there is created a simple user experience having just a conversational prompt and a role-based prompt. Now, if you're interested in learning to vibe code with me, you can come over to the Appy Dave website, book a call, and we can figure out how that could work for you. Otherwise, like and subscribe, because in the next video I'm going to be doing more on this app a day sort of concept and testing my ideas around vibe coding and software architecture. I'm Happy Dave. See you in the next video.